Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the Cypress dashboard presentation of how successful teams test. I am Cecilia Martinez. I'm a customer success engineer here at Cypress. Thanks for taking the time to join me today. I am joined by Magnolia, who will be moderating today. Are we all set to start, Magnolia?
Yep, we're all set.
Excellent. All right. So as I mentioned, I am Cecilia Martinez. I'm a success engineer at Cypress. So what I do is I spend my day talking to all of our Cypress users about their test strategy evaluation sessions and diving into their test code and kind of helping them optimize how to best use Cypress. So I'm going to be talking about some of the findings today of what I learned from that and how successful teams use Cypress to test. You can reach out to me on Twitter. I am at Cecilia Creates on Twitter. That's probably the best place to follow along. Additionally, we'll be using Slido today. So you can use the link that is on the screen, and we'll also be putting that out into the chat. So make sure that you leverage that for any of the questions. And then we're also going to be doing some polls today. So if you go to that app.sli.do/event and enter that event code, you'll be able to participate in some of the polls and things that we have today. Additionally, you can also leverage Slido to ask questions. We'll be doing a Q&A session, so make sure that you get your questions in using Slido so that we are able to answer them for you as we go along. All right. So first poll that we'll be running today is, how familiar are you with the Cypress test runner? So looking to essentially just get an idea of, what the familiarity is. So let me go ahead and get this going here. Okay, so how familiar are you with the Cypress test runner? I've heard of it, I've tried it, I've used it, or I love it. So you can use slido.com to go ahead and enter in your answers here. All right, okay, cool. So looks like we definitely have some experienced Cypress users, so that's great. And we have a couple of people that, okay, so we have some new people as well. All right, excellent. Okay, great. So it looks like about almost, 3/4 or so have at least, they use it or they've tried it. And then about 20% have at least heard of it or are familiar with Cypress, but may not have actually used it. So that's helpful. Yeah, so make sure if you have, we will be covering a little bit of the test runner today, but we'll be mostly focused on the Cypress dashboard. So. All right, so let's kind of just do a little bit of a review of the Cypress test runner based on the fact that there are some people here that haven't used it. So the Cypress test runner is an all-in-one solution for writing and executing end-to-end tests. And it's really built around the concept of improving the developer experience of testing. You probably heard before, end-to-end testing can be very painful. And so we really wanted to take the pain out of it and focus on usability and reliability specifically. So when we talk about usability, Cypress Test Runner is not only a graphical interface, but it's also a syntax and it's a framework for running your tests and writing your tests. So it has an English-like syntax that makes test writing really fast and easy to get up and started with. I mentioned before, it does have the interactive GUI for instant feedback and insights into your test runs. You can time travel through your tests. So as you can see on the screenshot here, on the left-hand side, we have what we call the command log. The command log shows the status of the DOM and then also your tests at every step of the way. So you can see what's happening, whenever a button is clicked, what that looks like before and after in the DOM. And it really helps give you that granular detail about commands, assertions, and even things like network requests and the stack trace for your error messages that allows you to really debug any kind of failed test as quickly and efficiently as possible. The other part of the test runner is reliability. So this is essentially talking about how when you write and run your Cypress tests, reducing the variability that you might experience with other frameworks. So Cypress is different in that it runs in a browser to best replicate the experience of your users. It has built-in actionability checks and automatic retries on the command level. So what that means is that Cypress will do its best to act like your user. If they try to click on an element that's covered up by another element or isn't actually actionable, then Cypress won't proceed. So it really does replicate that user experience when you're testing your application. Additionally, with the introduction of Cypress 5.0, we have optional retries on the test level. This is designed to identify and quarantine, or essentially allow you to identify flaky tests within your test suite in order to essentially establish your flake tolerance at the organization level, but then also have a strategy for quarantining and diagnosing these tests and understanding why they're flaky. Is it related to your application code? Is it related to your test suite, or is it related to your environment? And that allows you to be able to better diagnose and have more confidence in the overall health and effectiveness of your test suite. So all of that is kind of compounded or built upon with the Cypress dashboard. So the Cypress dashboard is essentially built to take the pain out of end-to-end testing by addressing the most common challenges that we hear from our users. So that takes us to our next poll. So what is the biggest challenge in your UI end-to-end test suite? So let's go ahead and so we have some options here. So flake, debugging test failures, setting up test automation, lack of team or company support for test automation, and then measuring test suite effectiveness. If it's something else, you can feel free to throw that in the chat if you like, or choose that one. But these are kind of some of the more frequent responses we hear. All right, so definitely some responses for flake, not surprised. Setting up test automation. Yeah, that's also a big one. Okay. Okay, a couple people said something else. Debugging test failures, also pretty low. So that's okay, that's good. And then just kind of letting some more answers come in here. So over half would say either flake or setting up test automation is one of the biggest challenge in the UI end-to-end test suite. Below that, we have lack of team or company support for test automation. And then going down a little bit further, debugging test failures and measuring test suite effectiveness. Great, awesome. So thanks for your participation there. So this is what we hear from Cypress users. Debugging failed tests is difficult and tedious. That's definitely a pain point that we hear a lot. Tests take too long to run and are complex to automate. So that was obviously one of the top poll answers, right? Getting your test automation set up, configured, running, troubleshooting it, everything involved with that, right? Next thing is flake is frustrating and reduces confidence in your test suite. This was the #1 poll answer. I would say it's also very much a big pain point that we hear from users in regards to overall end-to-end testing. And then last but not least, tests pass, but it's not clear if they're effective. So this is tied to a combination of flake, but then also just knowing whether or not you have good test coverage, good case coverage, good code coverage. You know, are our tests actually identifying the bugs that we want to find in our application and prevent? So what I want to do is to dive into each of these and talk about how successful teams address these issues using the Cypress dashboard. So the first one that we're going to dive into is debugging tests is difficult and tedious. So with the Cypress dashboard, there's an entire debugging workflow that I'm going to demonstrate right now. So let's go ahead and hop over into the Cypress dashboard. Here is the, oops, sorry, one second. All right, so here is the Cypress dashboard, and we're going to be looking at the Cypress Real World app. Let's see. There we go. So our Cypress Real World app is our flagship demonstration application for Cypress. This was an application that was developed by our developer experience team. It is a React application that mimics the functionality of like a Venmo, where you can send money back and forth between friends. This application is designed to demonstrate best practices, use cases, and real world scenarios with Cypress. So it is also open source, and we make all of the runs available on the Cypress dashboard public as well. So that's what we're going to be taking a look at today. So when you talk about debugging a test, right? So typically what the workflow that we see is by using one of the integrations, Slack or GitHub integration, a developer gets notified of a failed test. And so they typically will click on a link to go into the Cypress dashboard. This is the home page for the Cypress dashboard that shows all of your latest runs. When we have a failure, there's a lot of information that's available here immediately. You can kind of get some context for your different runs. So let's go ahead and pop in here. So we can see, again, the branch name. We have the message, that would commit message, the commit branch that you can actually click through if you have GitHub integrations set up. You also get helpful information about the OS that you're running on, the browser, and your version of Cypress. Now, this is a passing test run, right? Those are great, but they're not. We don't necessarily work with them very often. We deal with failures. So let's go ahead and take a look at what happens when there's a failure. So again, you may come into a failed run here, and you can immediately see all the context regarding the PR, the browser, and the version of Cypress that you're on. The run details page, which is what we're viewing right now, has a couple of different views. There's a timeline view, bar chart view, in which specs are sorted by duration. And then there's the machines view that shows how they've been split across machines if you're enabling parallelization. You can dive into failures specifically here and get access to the output, screenshots, and video for a failure. So here you can see the log output, screenshots of failures, and then also a video of the test run. We also make accessible the stack trace. So again, you're able to get a lot of views and information right away using the dashboard, but we can dive even further. If we go over to the test results tab and we filter by status, we can see all the specific test cases. So not just the specs, but the specific test cases that failed. And if we click on one, we can see our test case history. Here's where we can see all of the information regarding this specific test case. So we see, again, our browser, our run group. So in the Cypress Real World app, we run both UI and mobile tests, and we do cross-browser testing. So we run in Chrome and Firefox. So here we can right away see that this was a test that was run in Firefox, and it was a UI test, not a mobile test. Again, we can see the output of the view logs. We can see that this test was retried. So we can see the screenshots for each attempt, as well as the error message for each attempt. We can also see how many other tests it caused to fail. With the changelog information, because of the GitHub integration, we can actually see, when the last time is that the test was updated. So this changelog will show when the most recent change to the test was. So you can see, is this the first failure after a recent change, or is this the first failure after it's been consistently passing for months and months? That's a different type of insight that will help you diagnose whether this is a failure and how to kind of proceed with addressing it. Additionally, you have information related to the analytics of that test case. So you can see the failure rate. In this case, this test fails 100% of the time. Like that gives us some pretty good information, right? You can also see how the runtime has changed over time and the flaky rate. What's the most interesting to me is that you can also see your test code. So we have here the before each hook that had run, and then the actual body of the test code. So you're able to see all of this insight into a failed test without opening your IDE, without opening the test runner and running the test locally. You're able to get access to the output and the video and the screenshot all on one page. So the debugging workflow, by leveraging the test results tab with test case history, is an excellent kind of first step for triaging this debugging with the Cypress dashboard. So rather than having to get the results in your Slack or GitHub and then load up your IDE and pull up Cypress, you can do all of this in one screen in the dashboard. Okay, so that is debugging with the Cypress dashboard. Okay, so the next thing that we hear from our users is that tests take too long and are complex to automate, right? So test automation with the Cypress dashboard. Let's take a look at this. First, I want to talk about parallelization. So the Cypress dashboard allows you to parallelize your test runs across multiple machines. This not only speeds up the time that it takes to run your tests, but it also just improves developer velocity because they're not waiting for those tests to run every single time. And then they also will get notified once the test passed by using an integration. Enabling parallelization is very straightforward with the Cypress dashboard. Once you've enabled multiple machines within your CI, so we integrate with your existing CI provider and your existing CI pipeline, you essentially just need to add the parallel tag when you run your record. So wherever you're executing your test runs, whether that be from a terminal or whether that be from your CI configuration file, you just need to add the -- parallel. And so what Cypress does is it leverages smart parallelization. So it's not just taking the spec files and saying, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What it's doing is it's taking the analytical historical context of how long it's taken those spec files to run and then making the decision based on that. So it's essentially over time gets more and more efficient, and we make recommendations to you. So we actually will tell you, hey, you should take one machine off because it's taking more time to spin it up and it's actually adding to the efficiency of your test run. So again, if we dive into the analytics here, back into the Cypress dashboard, and we go onto any run. So we'll just pick one here. I mentioned earlier that there's this machines view. Again, the machines view will show all the specs and how they're broken up across different machines. So again, here we have 9 specs on 3 machines, 7 specs on 3 machines. And we're leveraging grouping with the Cypress dashboard to get better insight. So we have here all of our API tests, our UI Chrome tests, our UI Chrome mobile tests, and then our Windows tests, et cetera, et cetera. This See Full Analysis button, if you click on it in this view, will give you the recommendations. So in this case, we've been able to take that historical data and say, you've saved over 26 seconds. It's not a very big of a test suite, but it'll tell you if you wanted to bump it up to 4 machines, you're actually going to not save any time because it's going to take more time to spin that machine up. So we do give you recommendations in order to continually optimize your CI configuration to get the most out of the parallelization feature. Another thing that you can take a look at is on the analytics page, the run duration will also show you how much time you've saved from parallelization within your test suite over time. So this will show if the run duration has gone up, gone down over time, and then as well showing you the total time that you've saved from parallelization. The other aspect of test automation is integrations, right? So it's one thing to set it up to where the tests will run, but you have to know if the tests run, if they failed or passed, right? So the other aspect of this is leveraging the GitHub and Salesforce integrations that we have with the Cypress dashboard. So as we can see here, the way that the GitHub integration works is if we go to any pull request, let's just pick one here. Cypress will go ahead and post the test results back to the original pull request that initiated the test run. So again, we can see the run details here. We can view the runs on the Cypress dashboard. And then we can see if all checks have passed or not. So this is the Cypress bot that is integrated with the GitHub with the Cypress dashboard. Additionally, we also have our Slack integration. So Slack integration has a couple of different functionalities within it. It allows you to post failures only if you like, or you can post every result. You can also configure which channels that you'd like to post to, and you can do different configurations for different projects. Everything is set up from the integrations page in the Cypress dashboard. So GitHub integration, if we were to configure this, we can go ahead and connect. You simply just hit configure. It automatically will pull from the GitHub that you're connected to, and you can go ahead and get that set up on the project level. Same thing with our integration for Slack. Very straightforward, you can install it here. I wanted to show the different levels of granularity. So again, you can choose the channel that you select to, and you can also, it gives information about what Cypress will be able to view. So by leveraging those integrations, everything happens automatically, right? So you're already using GitHub. If you're already using Slack, then everything runs like magic. The tests fire off via your CI. They run in parallel as quickly as they can. That's optimized over time. GitHub integration will post the results back to your PR, notifying of preventing any checks. You can also integrate it where if that's a blocker or not in your CI. And then additionally, Slack integration can notify within certain channels so that developers can hop on a failure right away and not prevent any kind of releases or deployments. All right, so that takes us to our next poll question. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how much does Flake affect your test suite? So let's go ahead and get this one activated here. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how much does Flake affect your test suite? So not at all, we're Flake free. It's a huge pain point. All right, yeah, so if you are Flake free, then send me a DM on Twitter because I want to talk to you. I want to know how you do it. Okay, so 3, 2, 4, 5. Okay. So it looks like for the majority of people, they do experience some flake. Looks like about half have some flake, and then on the other, kind of outliers, it's either a moderate problem or it's a huge problem. Fortunately, it looks like it's only about a total blocker for 5% of you. But still, we'd like to help with that if we can. So let's talk about flake mitigation and flake detection with the Cypress dashboard. So Cypress dashboard provides test suite insights. So the first thing we're going to talk about is flake mitigation. So again, with the release of Cypress 5.0, we enabled test retries. So this is something that you can configure either at the test level or across your entire suite. Again, it's to give you control over your tolerance for flake in your test suite. So you can essentially, what happens is anytime a test both passes and fails within the same test run. So in other words, whenever you leverage a retry, the Cypress dashboard will mark that test as flaky. So we can see here on the latest runs page for the Cypress repository, again, this is also open source, we can see that we have this flaky badge that pops up on our runs. So that means that one test both passed and failed when retried. So if we go into our runs and then we go into test results, oh, this is a really big run. This is going to take forever. But essentially, again, into the test results, you can also filter by tests that are flaky and not flaky. So if you have a run with multiple flaky tests and you want to take a look at it and you see, what is the flake history of this test? So this one is flaky. Again, we can see that that's been identified as flaky. We can see the screenshots for multiple attempts. So we can see on the first attempt, there was a failure. We expected 0 to equal 1, and it did not. And then the second attempt, there was another failure, and it was the same failure. However, on the third attempt, it passed. So this is a flaky test. We can take a look at the flake rate here on the right-hand side. So we can see that on the develop branch, it has a flake rate of around 47%. On this specific branch, it has a flake rate of about 40%. So it's still flaky almost half the time. So that may be a test that we want to then quarantine or put into whatever your flake mitigation strategy is. So we've definitely seen organizations that will develop a process where they periodically review for flaky tests and then quarantine them maybe, or identify whether or not it needs to be quarantined as they investigate the root cause of that flaky test. If you go into the flaky test analytic, this will demonstrate the overall flakiness in your test suite, but then also the severity. So we determine severity based on how many times it has to retry, and then also the frequency of the time of the incident of flake for that specific test. So this allows you to take a look at your test suite and say, okay, these top 5 tests are the most flaky in our test suite. They're the ones that give us the most trouble. Let's take a deep dive and investigate why that is. Some of the other additional analytics that can help you identify that are on the left-hand side here. So we've added some new analytics, and this is something that we've continued to expand upon. in the Cypress dashboard. So one of the other challenges that we mentioned earlier is that it can be difficult to understand the overall health and effectiveness of your test suite, right? So our tests are passing, but do we really know or not if it's effective? So these analytics can provide a high level overview into your entire suite of test runs. So most common errors is, I think, one of my favorite indicators of test suite health, and it's one of the newer features that we have because it shows the type of errors that you have. In most cases, you should see assertion errors as the primary error because that means that one of the assertions in your test has failed. That's what you expect. You can also see things in here, though, called type errors. And type errors are errors that result from your application code, not from Cypress. So if you're seeing a lot of type errors, that would indicate that your application, it may not be as healthy as you thought, and you may want to have some additional tests to address those errors or identify the root cause of those errors. So this can give you some insight into the overall percentage of what and proportion of what type of errors you're experiencing. Additionally, you can also see top failures, right? This is another big one. Which tests in our test suite fail the most frequently? So test failures aren't bad. They can definitely, the purpose of them is to prevent regressions. But if you have certain tests that fail a lot or fail periodically or fail across the board, that may be something that can be investigated, right? Is that illuminating an issue across your entire application? Additionally, you have some analytics that have to do with the kind of the size and the speed of your test suite. So your test suite size, ideally, you can see how it either grows over time or if it stays the same. And one of the things that I talk about people about is making sure that you're continually using things like either code coverage or test case coverage to ensure that you're not over testing or under testing certain areas of your application or certain functionalities. So the test size can kind of give you an indication of that, especially if you're in that stage where you're still building up your core regression suite. Additionally, there's also the run duration time. So I did mention this earlier in regards to parallel time savings. So Cypress, you can see the Cypress test runner itself project has a lot of tests, takes a lot of time to run. So in the past 3 months, we've saved 2 months and 22 days from parallelization. And we typically run on 18 machines concurrently. But this will kind of show you over time the amount of time that your developers are saving and the velocity of your team and how it's improved. And last but not least, your run status, right? So this gives you an overall breakdown of how many times when you run your tests, if it's been a failure, a pass, or if there's some other type of issue like a timeout or a canceled or hanging run. This can also give you insight over time. Ideally, you see the green go up and the red go down, right? As the health of your test suite has improved over time. All right. So we covered talking about how to leverage the flaky test mitigation in the Cypress dashboard in order to detect and identify tests that you may want to quarantine, as well as how you can leverage the different analytics in the dashboard to identify and measure and get a better sense of just the overall health of your test suite, right? Is this impactful? Is this doing what we want it to do? Is it helping us meet our quality goals? So I wanted to talk about those 3 things that we just covered. So we essentially covered how to debug with the workflow. We also talked about setting up test automation with CI and with our integrations. And then we also talked about how you can leverage flaky test management and analytics to improve to get insight into the test suite and the reliability of it overall. So based on the ones that we just talked about, I'm curious what topic will have the biggest impact on your test suite? So let's go ahead and get this poll activated. So debugging with the Cypress dashboard, test automation with the Cypress dashboard, or test suite insights with this dashboard. All right. Okay. So that tends to also kind of line up with the poll question we asked earlier, right? So what are your biggest pain points? And then we said flake definitely was a big one, probably the biggest one if I remember correctly. And then also setting up in CI. So that makes sense if you think about that the topics that would have the biggest impact on your test suite, it's going to be those 2 things. It's going to be setting up test automation with the dashboard and also getting that additional insights. And those are also features that are pretty specific to the dashboard itself, and that you don't necessarily get with other testing frameworks. The debugging the Cypress dashboard is a personal favorite of mine, just because I do a lot of time debugging. So I think that having that one pane of view in order to see everything can be really helpful as well. So I'm glad that there's some people here who also got value out of that. So, all right, so we have some time now for some Q&A. I really appreciate everyone participating in the polls and listening in as we went over some different things. I would love to listen and see what kind of questions that y'all have. Magnolia, are you able to pull that up?
1 second.
Great, thank you. Oh, okay. So Magnolia, you're sharing screen?
One second. Sorry, Cecilia.
Oh, no problem. You're fine. So let's take a look here. All right, I just see some questions coming through on the chat, so I can go ahead and get those pulled up in the meantime. Awesome. Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and start grabbing some of these off the chat just to make sure we get through everything. So there is a question, if I want to create a test scenario with Google login, what is the best way of handling this? So typically when we talk about testing logins, most of the time it's a gateway to get into your application, but you don't really want to test it in the UI all the time. You don't want to do it for every single test. So we recommend using programmatic authentication. And there's a model for that in a Cypress Practices and Patterns webinar that we had recently. It's on our YouTube channel that goes over a model for programmatic authentication that allows you to essentially bypass the process of hitting that third-party authentication provider, but setting it up to where your application gets back the response it's expecting. So that allows you to be more efficient in saying, hey, test, I'm already logged in. This is my user, and then proceed from there. Yes, so the next question is, could the dashboard show the tests we create using integration with Cucumber? So what happens when you use the Cucumber Cypress preprocessor plugin? So this is a third-party plugin that allows you to write feature files and step actions, but then it uses the plugin in order to take those and dynamically generate Cypress tests. So what that will happen is you'll, in the test that in the Cypress dashboard, you will see the Cypress tests that get generated for each of those. What we recommend is if you use your feature files and your step actions and you label them correctly, or you label them, make sure that you're describing them well, when you see the results in the Cypress dashboard, you can still match that up to the correct feature that's associated with. You can also leverage either tags, or you can organize your files in a by feature file if you'd like to do it that way. And then you can run certain specs, or you can also tag your runs as well if that's easier for you based on certain features. So is there a self-hosted solution for Cypress dashboard? There is not currently. So it is a service that you go to a Cypress dashboard and you can log in with currently with either Google or GitHub. There is a free OSS plan. So if you're an OSS plan, you can apply for that. If you're open source and non-commercial, we do also have a seed plan that gives you access to start trying it out, and you get up to 500 test recordings per month. Are you using custom commands? Yeah, so Cypress does have custom commands built in as a tool to the framework. So you can write your own Cypress custom commands. You can use page object models. So that's the other part of the question is, are you using page object models or custom commands? So both, you can use either. I definitely talk to a lot of organizations that use page object model. The thing I will say about that is just to ensure that the methods on your page object models are properly wrapped so that they run accordingly with a Cypress test. The other thing is I just caution if you're using page objects models to make sure that your tests still line up with the user journeys. Sometimes I see whenever people use page object models, there's a very tight coupling between the application code and the test code, which if your application code is representative of your user journey, that's okay, but that's actually fine, that's great. But if it's not, then you want to make sure that your test cases are still representing that user journey that's important to your application. Are we able to record runs and use the dashboard from our local PCs? Absolutely. So you don't have to use CI with the dashboard. It's just recommended because we recommend just having a test automation pipeline with CI. It just improves kind of your overall software development philosophy. But you can record from the dashboard from your terminal when you're running your tests locally. So you can, as long as you start your server the same way you normally do, and you do, npx cypress run or whatever your command is that you have in your package.json, and you just do the -- record and you do the key, and it'll still go to the Cypress dashboard. So that's what I do that all the time. I record things to the dashboard because I want that insight, even though if it's a project that I don't have up and running in CI yet. And then, there's a question about when will there be an on-prem solution or on-premise solution for the Cypress dashboard? So that is currently it's not on our roadmap. However, we do have a product board for our Cypress dashboard where you can submit features and you can vote on them. And there is already a feature request for an on-prem solution. So you can definitely go on there and add your comments and support for that functionality if it's something that you'd like to see. Awesome. Okay, great. Magnolia, are there more questions on the Q&A? Okay, awesome. So our site authenticates over Auth0. Can you point us to any material on how to best automate login? I can. This is exciting. So we are our developer experience team has been working with a lot of authentication providers, specifically to provide examples for that programmatic authentication that I was talking about, where you essentially bypass the third party, but you tell your application what it needs. So we have an example for OAuth, Okta, and Auth0 that are associated with the real world app. So we're actually pulling those into the real world app to demonstrate how to do that. So with Auth0, that is one of the providers that we're working with specifically. So we do have a solution, but we're on the process of having an Auth0 approved solution, just with their input and feedback. So you can see that at the real world application. And I can also, I'll tweet that out today. I'll tweet out the link to that example, but if you go to the Cypress real world app, you should see there's an Auth0 branch that has that information on it. So we use GitHub Actions to run our tests. Will the parallelization flag work in that scenario? Yeah, so we actually use GitHub Actions too. So we use a lot of the different providers. You can do a lot with GitHub Actions in Cypress. Gleb, our VP of engineering, wrote a blog post last year. And then since then, there's just been so many more things. So we do have a GitHub action. We have a Cypress GitHub action, #1. Then we also have a repository with the sample configuration file if you don't want to use the action. And then we have examples within that repository that have a couple of different types of configuration, but you can definitely use parallelization with GitHub Actions. Will there be better support for drag and drop in the future? So there's a couple of different things that you can do with drag and drop, and it typically depends on your application. So in most cases, you can leverage site up trigger in order to replicate that behavior. That is something that I know that there's certain use cases, however, where that's more of a challenge, and there's a couple of open GitHub issues specific to those use cases. I would say if that's something that's a challenge for you, definitely let us know what your specific use case is, because drag and drop does work for a lot of people except for those certain use cases. So if we can identify those, then we can better support those in the future. Okay. Oh yeah, code coverage. Code coverage is great. I know that we do have one webinar about code coverage, and then with the Cypress Real World app, we use the Code Cov plugin to report back. So I mentioned earlier that we were able to get, maybe I didn't mention this, but we were able to get 100% code coverage using the Cypress Real World app with the UI tests. So that leverages CodeCov, and we have an entire code coverage guide in our documentation. So if you go to our docs and you just search code coverage, there's an entire guide about how to implement that into your existing test suite. So there's an extra charge to use parallelization feature for Cypress. So the way that the Cypress dashboard works with parallelization is you get a certain number of test recordings per month. So I mentioned earlier that you get up to 500. So you have up to 500 test recordings per month against the Cypress dashboard, and then it scales up from there. So you do have to record to the dashboard in order to leverage parallelization, because that's how the dashboard knows the historical analytics of your test runs in order to split them out. And that's also how it communicates with it in order to tell them how to split that out. So it's all based on the number of tests that you're running each month. It's not based on paying extra for a certain feature. It's a good question. Yeah, so setup required for parallelization. So we do have a parallelization guide as well in our documentation that gives you an overview of all the different examples that for your CI configuration, because really all that needs to be done on the CI side is enable the multiple machines and then enabling parallelization, whether with that parallel flag, but then you may also need to necessarily tell your CI how many machines to spin up, right? And so we have that guide, which has a number of sample configuration files and tell you how to run it. But ultimately, once you have multiple machines, you can just do the -- parallel, and that will turn on Cypress parallelization. And then can you export information from the dashboard? So you can export analytic information as I think it's a CSV, but it's on the analytics page. You can download that data. There is not currently a API or anything like that as far as to download test result information. That is something, an API request is also on our product board if you wanted to add support for that feature. But the analytics information you can definitely export as a CSV report. So that's all set up. How many virtual machines can be added for parallel testing? Again, that's all set up with your CI. So you can enable as many machines as you like, and then we will again give you those recommendations of saying, hey, if you added 3 more machines, it would increase it would reduce test amount by this time, or we'll say, hey, take some off because it's not efficient. Let's see, can you test rsx.xml files? So Cypress runs in a browser. So as long as that file, it has to be something that renders in a browser. However, there's a couple of things that you can do. You could leverage, for example, Cypress fixtures in order to kind of import that information and then maybe make assertions against it. So it depends. I would say if you have a specific example or use case, that might be something that we could take a look at, or if you create like a GitHub issue around that if it's not working. Typically, I tell people it probably will work. We just haven't done it yet, and then if you have an issue, then let us know and we can troubleshoot it from there. So awesome, great questions. So it looks like we have a couple more in the chat. So I do want to just kind of grab those real quick. Okay. So what is the best solution to implement the registration process? When users should click on confirmation click? Okay, so I'm not quite sure exactly what the use case is there, but it sounds like there's probably something in your registration flow that requires like a confirmation email perhaps, or some kind of landing page that requires you to do a confirmation click. I have seen people use like Mailosaur. There's another one too that I can't remember off the top of my head, but various plugins if they need to generate like email links and codes for that. So that might be something that you can implement. And again, there's also always the programmatic bypass option. If I see the reports. Yeah, so when you say locally, I know you can run, so the question is, can I use the free version of the dashboard locally to see the reports? So everything that gets reported to the dashboard does get reported. You do have access to the dashboard on a browser in order to see that. But you can run locally from your computer to the dashboard. So if you're running your test locally and you just add that -- record and your record key, it'll get sent up to the Cypress dashboard, and you can log in and you can view your results and you can view your reports up to 500 test recordings per month for free. Or if you have a non-commercial OSS plan, then you can get unlimited test recordings. So great questions. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again here. Okay, so if we don't have any other questions, I do want to talk about kind of some next steps of how you can take this information and implement it yourself. So if you're interested in getting started with the Cypress dashboard, you can get started for free. Just go to cypress.io/dashboard, log in with Google or GitHub, and then you're able to get started. And you can create a project either from the Cypress dashboard itself, or you can create a project from the test runner. And then you essentially just port over your project ID and your record key when you run your commands, and you're able to get started. Additionally, I wanted to point out our documentation. We have very thorough documentation that includes a lot of different guides that I mentioned. So I did mention specifically, we have some guides here on code coverage. So that's going to be in our tooling section. We have a code coverage guide. And there's the webcast here if you're interested in implementing code coverage. We also talked about parallelization. So there is a guide to parallelization as well. Here's where, if you have any questions about turning on parallelization, how the CI machine interacts with the dashboard, and also all of our example configurations. Additionally, I also talked about flaky test management. So there is the flaky test management guide in our docs as well, if you're specifically interested in how test retries works and how the Cypress dashboard determines when a test is flaky. All right, and then we will also be sending a follow-up email from our team, so just make sure that you keep an eye out for that. And yeah, so thank you everyone for your great questions today. I think I do see one more, so I'm gonna, oh, okay, it's just a thank you. Well, thank you everyone too. This was really great. Very great participation and questions, and I hope that you're able to take some of these strategies and take them back to your own test suite and leverage them in your organization. Excellent. All right. Any other questions, Magnolia? Or I don't see any coming through, so I think
We are good. Thank you, guys.